They called it the purest bloodline in the South. 7 generations without a single outsider. 7 generations of arranged marriages, cousin weddings, and carefully selected unions designed to keep the family name untainted. The Caruthers family didn't just preserve their wealth, they preserved their blood. And in 1891, after decades of this sacred ritual, the Heir was finally born. But when little Edmund opened his mouth to cry, the sound that came out didn't belong to him. It belonged to someone else. Someone who had been dead for 30 years. This is a story about what happens when a family refuses to let go. When bloodlines become prisons, and when the past doesn't just haunt you, it inhabits you. The Caruthers estate sat on 2,000 acres of Tennessee farmland, built on cotton silence, and secrets buried so deep they became part of the soil itself. The family patriarch, Nathaniel Caruthers, had one obsession: purity. Not just of race, though that was part of it, but purity of lineage. He believed that mixing blood with outsiders weakened the soul, that every generation should marry within the family, or as close to it as the law would allow. His children married their cousins. His grandchildren did the same, and by the time Edmund was born, the family tree didn't branch anymore. It folded in on itself like a closed fist. But something went wrong. Edmund's mother, Catherine, had been promised to her second cousin since she was 12. The marriage was arranged, consummated, and medicalized. Doctors were brought in to monitor every stage of the pregnancy. Everything had to be perfect. This child was supposed to be the culmination of generations of selective breeding, the proof that the Caruthers method worked. But when Edmund was born, the midwife dropped him. Not out of clumsiness, out of fear, because the baby's cry wasn't a baby's cry. It was the voice of a grown man. Deep, raspy, and unmistakably familiar to everyone in that room. It was the voice of Nathaniel's younger brother, Thomas, the brother who had been murdered 3 decades earlier in a field dispute. The brother whose body was never found. The brother whose name was never spoken aloud again. The family tried to explain it away. Babies sometimes have strange cries, they said. The acoustics of the room were off. The midwife was hysterical, unreliable, probably drunk. But Catherine knew what she heard, and so did her husband, William. Because when Edmund cried again that night alone in his crib, the sound echoed through the halls like a man calling out from the bottom of a well. And the words were clear enough to freeze the blood of anyone who heard them. "Let me out." Catherine stopped sleeping. She would stand in the doorway of the nursery for hours, watching her son's tiny chest rise and fall, waiting for that voice to come again. And it did. Not every night, but often enough. Sometimes it was just a word. Sometimes it was a full sentence. And the voice was always the same. Thomas, the dead brother. The ghost they had tried to bury with silence. William wanted to call a doctor. Catherine refused. She knew what doctors did to children like this. They locked them away, studied them, destroyed them. So instead, she did what the Caruthers family always did. She kept it secret. She told the staff that Edmund had a condition affecting his vocal cords. She forbade anyone from entering the nursery without permission, and she began to research the family history in ways she had never been allowed to before. What she found made her wish she hadn't looked. Thomas Caruthers had been the youngest son, the rebellious one, the one who questioned the family's obsession with purity. He had fallen in love with a woman from town. A woman with no family name, no land, no bloodline worth preserving. Nathaniel forbade the marriage. Thomas threatened to leave. And then, one morning, Thomas was gone. The official story was that he ran off, abandoned the family in shame. But the whispers said something else. They said Nathaniel had taken him into the fields, that there had been a confrontation, that Thomas had been buried somewhere on the estate, his name erased, his existence scrubbed from every record. Catherine found letters, hidden in the attic, tucked inside a Bible that hadn't been opened in decades. Letters Thomas had written to his forbidden love, letters that ended abruptly, and one final letter, unfinished, written in a handwriting that grew more frantic with each line. "They are coming for me. If you find this, know that I did not leave willingly. I will not rest until the truth is spoken." Catherine burned the letters that same night, but it didn't matter. The truth was already speaking, through her son. Edmund grew, but not the way children are supposed to grow. His body developed normally. He learned to walk, to grasp objects, to recognize faces. But his voice never changed. When he spoke his first words at 18 months, they came out in that same low, adult rasp. Ma sounded like a threat. Papa sounded like an accusation. The household staff began to quit without explanation. One maid claimed she heard Edmund having full conversations with himself in the dark, except it wasn't himself. It was 2 voices. The child's thoughts, struggling to form sentences, and Thomas's voice, answering back. Catherine started drinking laudanum to sleep. William stopped coming home before midnight, and Edmund, alone in his nursery, began to remember things he had never experienced. He would describe the fields in winter, the way the frost looked on the cotton before harvest. He was 3 years old. He had never been allowed outside. He would talk about a woman named Margaret, the way her hair smelled like lavender, the way she laughed when he told her they would run away together. He would cry, not with a child's frustration, but with the deep, guttural sobs of a man who had lost everything. And when Catherine tried to comfort him, he would look at her with eyes that didn't belong to a little boy, eyes that held decades of rage. "You let him do it," the voice said one night. Edmund was 4. He was sitting in his bed, hands folded in his lap like an old man at a funeral. "You all let him do it, and now I'm trapped in here, in this bloodline, in this body." Catherine ran from the room. She told William they had to send Edmund away, to a hospital, a sanitarium, anywhere. But William refused. The Caruthers family did not send their children away. They did not admit weakness. They did not let the outside world see their flaws. So Edmund stayed, and the voice grew stronger. By the time he was 7, Edmund rarely spoke in his own voice anymore. Thomas had taken over. He would sit at the dinner table and recount memories that belonged to a dead man. He knew where the old tools were kept in the barn. He knew which floorboards creaked in the hallway. He knew the names of horses that had been sold before Edmund was born, and one day he told them where the body was. "Under the oak, the one by the eastern fence, 3 feet down, you'll find me there. And when you do, you'll understand what you created." William didn't dig, but Catherine did. Late one night, with a shovel and a lantern, she went to the oak tree. She dug until her hands bled, and 3 feet down, just as the voice had said, she found bones. A skull with a fracture through the temple. A ring still on one of the fingers. Thomas's ring. The one Nathaniel said he had taken with him when he ran away. Catherine buried it again. She never told William what she found, but Edmund knew, because Thomas knew. And from that night on, the voice stopped sounding angry. It started sounding victorious. Edmund turned 10 the year his father died. William Caruthers collapsed in his study, clutching his chest, surrounded by ledgers and land deeds and bottles of whiskey he thought no one knew about. The doctor called it a heart attack. Catherine called it mercy, because William had started hearing the voice too. Not from Edmund, from the walls, from the fields, from the air itself. He told Catherine, 3 days before he died, that Thomas was waiting for him, that he could feel him in the house, move in through the rooms at night, standing at the foot of their bed. William died looking at something no one else could see, and his last words were not for his wife or his son. They were an apology. "I should have stopped him," William whispered. "I should have told." After the funeral, Catherine tried to leave. She packed a single bag, took what money she could carry, and made it as far as the front gate before Edmund appeared. He was standing in the road, barefoot, nightgown soaked with dew. But it wasn't Edmund looking back at her. It was Thomas. "You're not going anywhere," the voice said. Calm, cold. "This family stays together. That's the rule, isn't it? That's what Father always said. Pure blood, pure legacy. You don't get to run from what you are." Catherine returned to the house. She never tried to leave again. The years that followed were a slow descent into something worse than madness. Edmund stopped pretending to be a child. He walked like Thomas, spoke like Thomas, developed Thomas's tastes, his habits, his hatreds. He would sit on the porch at dusk and stare at the fields the way Thomas used to. He started wearing his father's old clothes, even though they didn't fit. And when Catherine tried to hire tutors, governesses, anyone to bring some normalcy into the house, Edmund would drive them away with a single conversation. He would tell them things no child should know. Family secrets, hidden debts, affairs, crimes, things Thomas had witnessed before his death, things that should have stayed buried. By the time Edmund was 15, the estate was rotting, the staff was gone, the fields went unworked. Catherine lived in 3 rooms of a 20-room house, drinking herself into oblivion while her son paced the halls, muttering in a dead man's voice. And then, one morning, Edmund did something no one expected. He asked for a shovel. "I want to see him," Edmund said. Except it wasn't Edmund asking. It was Thomas. "I want to see what's left of me. I want to know what it feels like to look at my own bones." Catherine tried to stop him, but Edmund was stronger now. He went to the oak tree. He dug, and when he unearthed the skeleton, he sat beside it for hours, speaking to it in whispers no one else could hear. When he finally came back to the house, his hands were black with soil, and his eyes were empty. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not until every last one of you pays for what you did. Not until this bloodline ends the way it deserves to." Edmund turned 18 in 1909, the same year Catherine stopped eating. She didn't announce it, didn't make a show of it. She simply stopped putting food in her mouth. She would sit at the table across from her son, watching him consume meals with the appetite of a man twice his age, and she would drink water until her hands shook. The staff was long gone. The neighbors had stopped visiting. The Caruthers name, once spoken with reverence in every town from Nashville to Memphis, was now whispered with suspicion. People crossed the street when Catherine came to town. Children were pulled inside when Edmund walked past. Something was wrong at that house. Everyone knew it. No one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Catherine lasted 6 weeks. When they found her, she was in her bed, hands folded across her chest like she'd arranged herself for burial. There was no note, no explanation. But Edmund knew, because Thomas knew, she had starved herself to escape him, to escape the voice, to escape the truth of what her family had done. And in her final days, she had whispered the same thing over and over, so quietly the walls barely caught it. Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. But forgiveness wasn't something Thomas was interested in. After Catherine's death, Edmund inherited everything. 2,000 acres, the house, the name, and the curse that came with it. He lived alone in that decaying estate for 3 more years, and in that time, he did something the family had never allowed. He started talking. To journalists, to historians, to anyone who would listen. He told them about the murders, about the incest, about the children born with deformities that were hidden away or left to die. He told them about the cousin marriages, the forced unions, the daughters who were promised to uncles before they could read. He told them about Thomas, and he told them that Thomas was still there, still speaking, still waiting. Most people thought he was insane, but some believed him, and those who visited the estate said the same thing. They could hear it too. A second voice, layered beneath Edmund's. Older, angrier, a voice that didn't belong to the living. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have run, or would you have stayed to face what your family buried? Edmund Caruthers died in 1912. He was 21 years old. They found him in the field, near the oak tree, a pistol in his hand and a hole through his temple, the same place Thomas's skull had been fractured. The coroner ruled it a suicide. But the groundskeeper, the one man who still came to the estate once a week to check the property, said he heard 2 gunshots that night. Not 1, 2, fired seconds apart, as if someone had tried to kill the voice first, and then himself. The estate was abandoned. The land was sold off in parcels over the next 2 decades. The house burned down in 1931 under circumstances no one could explain, and the Caruthers name disappeared from record. But the story didn't end, because in 1958, a construction crew working on a new development in that part of Tennessee unearthed something they weren't supposed to find. A second grave, unmarked, shallow, and inside it, the bones of a child. A child no one had ever reported missing. A child with a fractured skull that matched the injury pattern of Thomas Caruthers. No one knows who that child was. But the locals say if you go to that land at dusk, you can still hear it. A voice layered doubled, speaking from somewhere beneath the soil, saying the same thing over and over. Let me out. There are no living descendants of the Caruthers family. The bloodline ended with Edmund. No cousins came forward to claim the estate. No distant relatives appeared at the auctions. It was as if the family had been erased, not just from the land, but from history itself. The county records from that era are incomplete. Entire years are missing. Birth certificates were lost in a fire. Death certificates were never filed. And the few documents that do exist are contradictory, listing the same names in different years, the same deaths reported multiple times, as if the family itself couldn't decide what was real and what was buried. But the land remembers. The people who live there now, the ones who built homes on what used to be Caruthers soil, they report things. Voices in the early morning. Shadows that move through the fields when no one is there. Children who wake up speaking in voices that aren't their own. One family moved out after their 5-year-old son started describing a man named Thomas who visited him at night. A man who told him stories about being trapped, about bloodlines that turn into cages, about families that love each other so much they suffocate. The boy's parents thought he had an imaginary friend, until he started speaking in that voice. The low, raspy voice of a man who had been dead for over a century. They left within a week. The house has been empty ever since. In 1983, a historian named Dr. Raymond Collier tried to write a book about the Caruthers family. He spent 2 years researching, combing through archives, interviewing the few remaining locals who remembered the stories their grandparents told. He visited the land. He stood where the house once stood. And he recorded hours of audio notes, documenting everything he found. But the book was never published. Because halfway through writing it, Dr. Collier started hearing a voice on his recordings. A voice that wasn't his. A voice that seemed to respond to his questions, even though no one else had been in the room. He destroyed the recordings, burned his notes, and refused to ever speak about the Caruthers family again. When asked why, he would only say one thing: some stories don't want to be told, they want to be continued. The truth is, we don't know what happened in that house. We don't know how many children were born and hidden away, how many bodies are still buried on that land, how many voices were silenced in the name of purity. But we know this: the Caruthers family believed that blood was everything, that keeping it pure, keeping it contained would make them immortal. Instead, it made them a prison, a bloodline so tightly wound that it strangled itself. And when Edmund was born, he wasn't just an heir, he was a vessel, a final resting place for all the rage, all the guilt, all the horror that family had tried to bury. Thomas didn't possess Edmund, he inherited him, the same way Edmund inherited the estate, the name, and the sins of everyone who came before. That's what happens when you refuse to let the past die. When you trap it in bloodlines and silence and soil, it doesn't disappear, it waits. And when the conditions are right, when the blood is pure enough, concentrated enough, it comes back. Not as a ghost, as a voice, a memory made flesh, a truth that refuses to stay buried. The land where the Caruthers estate once stood is still for sale. It's been on the market for 40 years. The price keeps dropping. No one stays longer than a season, and every time a new family moves in, the same thing happens. The children start hearing voices, the parents start fighting, and sooner or later someone starts digging, looking for something they can't explain, something they feel calling to them from beneath the ground. Maybe it's Thomas. Maybe it's all of them. Every Caruthers who died in that house, on that land, trapped in a bloodline that wouldn't let them go. Or maybe it's something worse. Maybe purity isn't strength. Maybe it's a door, and the Caruthers family opened it so wide, they let something through that was never supposed to walk among the living. If you drive through that part of Tennessee today, you won't find a marker, no historical plaque, no mention of the family that once ruled those fields. But if you stop your car at dusk and roll down the window, some say you can still hear it. Faint, distant, a voice that sounds like it's coming from two places at once, from the past and from something that never left. And if you listen closely enough, you'll hear what it's saying. This bloodline isn't over. It's just waiting for the next heir.